Before we get started, I wanted to share a quick word from our sponsor, Logify. If you've been thinking about building your own direct booking channel and reducing your reliance on the OTAs, stay tuned, because later in this episode, I'll be sharing a genuinely great offer that's available just to Vacation Rental Success listeners. You don't want to miss this. This is the Vacation Rental Success Podcast, keeping you up to date with news, views, information and resources on this rapidly changing short-term rental business. I'm your host, Heather Bayer, and with 25 years of experience in this industry, I'm making sure you know what's hot, what's not, what's new, and what will help make your business a success. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Vacation Rental Success Podcast. This is your host, Heather Bayer, and as ever, I'm super excited to be back with you once again. I'm back from a fantastic trip to Denver to the VR Nation conference. It was an amazing few days. Conferences are always like that. Just really great to network and talk with people. It's been a bit of a while since I've been around and about at a conference, not since last year at Verma. So it was great. Thank you to everybody who turned up for my talk, which was called Turning AI from a Side Project into Business Infrastructure. And the central idea from it and the opening of my presentation, I talked about Hurricane Andrew in 1992 and the absolute devastation it caused across southern Florida. And while it was a Category 5 hurricane, it wasn't unprecedented, as hurricanes go. And the winds weren't unprecedented, even though they were at around 165 miles per hour. But what was unprecedented was the destruction and damage that hurricane caused. So out of that hurricane, and over the next few years, the Miami-Dade Construction Code was built out, and it's become one of the strictest building codes there is across the US. And it hasn't made builders and construction people more craftsman-like, but it's helped them to build stronger properties that are much more capable of withstanding these types of storms. And this code has become a standard for building in most hurricane-prone areas. And it wasn't the storm itself that solely created the damage. What that storm did was exposed the weakness in the connections in a lot of these homes. It exposed weaknesses in the joints, in straps, in nails, in the junctions between walls and roofs. And while AI is unlikely to create any such devastation, it's nonetheless a storm that is coming. And in much the same way, it's not creating weaknesses in your business, it's exposing them. So one of the things I asked the room to do at VR Nation was an AI readiness audit, which goes across 5 dimensions: people, processes, technology, data, and culture. Because the thing I find most operators are least prepared for isn't the technology dimension, it's the people one. And I think probably most of you have never asked your team what they actually think about AI, what they're worried about, what they're already using on the quiet. We call that shadow AI. Where they think it's helping, where they think it's pulling something out of the work that mattered to them. And we've made decisions about which tools to bring in, how to set them up, what to automate, but we've largely left the people inside the business out of that conversation. And that's the thread I want to pull on today, because my guest is unusually well placed to help us out. Ella Mezhiborsky is the co-founder and president of AutoHost, which is an AI-powered guest screening platform used by property managers around the world. But before Ella built AutoHost, she ran her own property management company in Toronto. She knows this world from both sides. She built the tool because she was the operator who needed it. And what makes Ella the right person for today's discussion is that she's running an AI-first company, and she's visibly thoughtful about what that means for the humans inside of it. Her team takes a self-care day every year. She wrote about it on LinkedIn, which is the reason I am having this discussion with her. Because I saw that post and it really struck a chord with me. And her writing keeps coming back to the question of where automation should stop and judgment take over. So we talk about what AI actually does to a team, what it gives, what it takes, and what you have to actively protect. And we look at where AI should never quite reach. And by the end of this episode, if you're someone who was there at VR Nation in that talk and you took some notes, or maybe you heard about the audit afterwards, I want you to have a much sharper sense of how to do the people and culture dimension of that audit properly. And I also have the link to the audit on the show notes. If you want to go and do the 5-dimension AI audit, you can, and we'll give you the results. And maybe I'll come back on another episode and talk about how we take those results and put them into practice. But for now, and without further ado, let's get into my discussion with Ella. So this episode has been a long time in coming, and so has this conversation, because I have known about my guest today for quite some time, and we've been going backwards and forwards on LinkedIn saying we really should have a conversation. And then we're both going to be at Scale AI in Brighton in June. But I had to have Ella on the show today so that I can introduce both of us together. How's that, Ella?
Yeah,
How great to have you here. So lovely that you're just down the road from me.
that's true.
We've been backwards and forwards on LinkedIn, and you're not a stranger to podcasts. I've heard you on multiple other podcasts, and it's been such an insight into you and your company. But there may still be people in my audience who have not heard from you or heard of you. So for those who don't know your story, can we start at the beginning? Because you were running properties in Toronto before you got into AutoHost, before it existed. So
Right.
can you give us the backstory?
Yes. Yes. So I managed a property management company here in Toronto. It was called Quick Stay, and we managed a little over 100 properties at the peak. And it started very much on a whim, travel, work remote, kite surf when we're gone. We did the whole work remote like way before COVID made it popular. And just rented out our place. I think many people start that way. Then, cha-ching, and you see the potential. Then you add a little bit of that marketing experience, and we're like, how can we elevate this? And that really grew to be a property management company here in Toronto. But we're always very much heavy on tools and automations. Like we were very early guest users, for example. When automated messages came and I didn't have to copy paste, better than sliced bread. So early on, but then with all the tools, we made a point to utilize whatever we can to keep a very lean team and use technology as much as possible. And then wherever we identified the gaps, we had enough technical expertise within the team to really work on automating a lot of the hosting activities, which, fun fact, that's why it's actually called AutoHost,
Mhm.
because we're automating a lot of the different hosting activities. It didn't start just with screening. So there was like buzzer activation and cleaning schedule and internal things for the team. But then we really slowly narrowed in as the portfolio grew. And as our team, that was actually interesting, as our team became a little bit more international.
Mhm.
So now you're dealing with people that they're guest support agents, but real people, not agents. And they're dealing with, they have to make a judgment call based on where their moral compass lies and whether you'd like to admit it or not, bias and discrimination lie. Is somebody going to be like sketchy or difficult or cause any problems? And we pretty much came to a point where after some incidents started happening and we're like, we're in such a beautiful space and I love hospitality for what it is. It's not because that we're dealing with the bad apples.
Mhm.
And so we came to a point where we had to bring in this sort of a standardized, I drew a decision tree on the board. That was a version 1, right? Of how do we split guests based on some factors into risk levels? And we just went red, orange, yellow, green. And we're like, if it's a couple coming from Spain to visit their daughter in university, don't send them capital letters saying that they're not allowed to play loud music after 1 a.m. No need. And vice versa. In a lot of cases where you don't fall victim to certain like easy lies, if they're booking a 4-bedroom penthouse on a Friday, it's not a 24-year-old that's celebrating his anniversary with his girlfriend.
Mhm.
But that's where there's one thing that's common sense, but you needed to standardize. So we brought in this sort of a framework for our internal team of how to split guests into certain risk levels. And given that, how do we go about screening them? That took a very dramatic turn. It was, I believe, Christmas 2016. where we got a phone call from Toronto Deputy Police telling us that they have a confirmed sighting of a known gang member posting on Instagram with automatic weapons, asking for our permission to raid the place. And that kind of started like this really more intense investigation. This was Christmas, mind you. So looking back at our records, and since we already had AutoHost 1.0 in action, we were able to then go back and look at some reservations, but we screened them. And we basically were able to identify that since September, we've been targeted with a local Toronto Montreal gang that was booking properties. They were filing for chargebacks, but we never connected the dots. And in the units, there was anything from fentanyl and escort services, and the stories are horrific, but we didn't have a way to pinpoint it. And at that point, working with police, seeing what data we have, we said, okay, AutoHost needs to be taken to a whole next level. This isn't it's no longer like gray area risk of parties, rule compliance, smoking, vandalism. Now you're getting into serious fraud and criminal activity and lying about identities. And so and at the time, by the way, so Roy Firestein, who's my co-founder and CEO, he comes from the cybersecurity space. So at the beginning, it was very much weekend projects and building out the insides of the brain of QuickStay. But at that point, we realized that AutoHost needs to be its own thing because companies bigger and better than us need this yesterday. And we also said, okay, Roy, like he comes from cybersecurity. There's real fraud. We're scratching the surface when we're looking at, is this person likely to have a party, right? Like you have your culprits, you have your one-nighters, and you have your locals, and you have your young, but just when it's real fraud, those quick triggers are not going to flag because they're more sophisticated than that. So that's when we really took AutoHost to the next level. And it is the early stages of what AutoHost is now, which is really a guest screening and identity verification platform. And we work with hospitality operators. We now get embedded into a lot of the hospitality tech, so PMSs, guest apps, pretty much just to make guest screening and identity verification accessible so that you're focused on prevention rather than dealing with the consequences, which you also should be doing. But yeah.
That's an amazing story. And it takes me back. I had a property management company up here in cottage country for 20 years. And we had this, it was always this gut feeling. We made our judgments really, when I think about it now, the hard way. You had a feeling. Somebody said, I'm not sure about this one. You spot patterns and you don't forget. So AutoHost in a way is replacing that gut reaction with a model, right?
I would say adding a lot on top of it and improving. So it doesn't have to replace if you have everything is customizable. I lived off of gut feeling for a long time, but A, I couldn't pass that on to my team. And B, it's not scalable. And then there's obviously the things where your gut feeling is actually a loophole because it's misleading you because people are exploiting it. So I'd say that kind of gut feeling is something that you should keep when you're setting your rules, when you think you need to override a decision because you have more context. But at the end of the day, like what you're running, and this is technicality, but AutoHost would never decline a reservation. It just gives you the risk profile, it gives you all the data points. So if anything, you are now able to introduce better processes that are a little more systematic for your team to then say, given these data points, we are comfortable hosting, we need an extra security deposit, we would like to decline this reservation. So it just gives you a lot more objectivity that helps stop the bias and flag more things that you wouldn't have caught otherwise.
I love the idea. I think if I was back in that position of running a property management company, which I am very glad I'm not, I can see that it would be something that would be super helpful to sit alongside the gut feeling. Particularly, we were managing upwards of 200 properties by the time I sold the company. And as you say, when you're doing gut instinct at scale, it can be a little bit overwhelming. So I like it when you said that it's not going to make those decisions and cancel a reservation for you, but it's going to flag it. And that would be so helpful. I can see in retrospect, there's so many things that are coming on the market now that I think, oh my gosh, things would be so different if I was back running that company today.
Yeah. And when you're talking 200 properties, at the end of the day, it's scale that's the issue. So when you're going over 1,000 guests, you or your team, instead of looking at 1,000 reservations, you'd like the tool and the automation given your rules to process like
Yeah.
whatever, all of the 900 and whatever. And then we need human eyes on these 27.
It's interesting, Alex. It just got me thinking that when I started back in 2003, which is when we started our company, we had this long application form that people had to fill in. And we had the names and the ages and the occupations and the driver's licenses and the home insurance numbers. And I'm sure people listening today are going, "What? You did that?"
Yep.
But that's what we did, and that was acceptable. People accepted
Mm.
that. But over time, and I think it came with online booking. Once online booking came along, you didn't have that deeper connection that you made with guests at the very outset, where you could have that relationship with them before they arrived.
When you create a platform for the safety part, where at the end of the day, they care to make sure the transaction goes through. So you have a bit of a disconnect.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to ask you something that really struck me in a LinkedIn post I saw. And that was when I said, I've got to get Ella onto the show to talk about this, because you described an annual company-wide self-care day that you've built into AutoHost culture. And most companies that are involved in AI don't talk about that. And you use AI a lot within your company. So what made it important to you to build that up as a tradition? And I'd also like to know how you think about the humanity of your own team when you run a company whose product is automation.
First of all, we could take a day off because who do you think was running the show? We had AI. No, it's a loaded question. There's a few things there. So first of all, there is a personal, sentimental background to the tradition. And then there's really the meaning behind it and what we want to convey. The idea for self-care is burnout is real. And there's something, it's different than a weekend. It's different than a holiday. You need that time for yourself to invest in you. And I think even calling it self-care is almost it's forcing people to do that. And now,
Because you
again,
could
this
call
is
it self-indulgent day.
sure. Maybe we'll start another one though. That's also not bad. And mind you, this is an annual one. I'll get back to the background in a second. But we actually have also like the last Friday of every month, we call it an FU Friday, which stands for Fuel Up. But we do that too. So there is like a monthly, we wrap up around 12. It's like a happy FU Friday and everybody goes together because it's time you get as a gift. So in general, I'd say that it's not just once a year. It's something that we value and we recognize and the team appreciates. And one of our core values that we live by and we really respect, but one of them is enjoy the journey.
Mhm.
And I think that in this day and age, when people have options and you millennials onwards and just people really value their time. And at the end of the day, you spend more time with your teammates at work than with your kids and with your partner and with anybody else, that I think very early on, we recognize the need to give that. It's not even balance. It's not two edges of a thing. It's harmony altogether. So the team appreciates it and we do really like the importance of it. The annual self-care day in specific, there's a bit of an additional just sentimental value there. I don't think many know this right now, but we used to be three co-founders. Anton Zilberberg was the CEO. He was also my husband. And Anton passed away 5 years ago. So we right now are at this point of, ironically, like 90% of the team hasn't met him, but there's this passion to keep his philosophy alive. And now Anton was like an older kind of titan in the industry. Like at the time, he was hanging out with the STR legends, all the old school people. I think actually Will Slickers had an interview with him that was going to get posted, and he ended up releasing it like after. He was there, he was the face, and there was a lot of just energy and passion. And he was a kite surfer, and he was just like, he didn't care if it's midweek or weekend. If it's windy, I'm kite surfing, but otherwise I'm working and I'm running things. And he would just juggle everything, but never compromise, just enjoying life, enjoying the journey. And it's like a little, I mean, we try to do it all the time, but there's this beautiful one day a year, and we chose his birthday to just give the entire team this day to just take it.
I think that's a wonderful testimony to him. And I never met Anton, but I do remember that time in 2020 and the STR Legends team, and and his story was just wonderful. So it must have been just, of course, tragic loss for you, but for you to now take that and to build out on his legend and make it part of AutoHost now. I think that is such a wonderful testament to him.
We do call it Anton Day internally, but I think the AutoHost Self-Care Day is a catchier kind of, yeah.
So when a property management company brings in AI, whether it's AutoHost for screening or it's a pricing tool, everybody's work changes. You seem to be so in touch with your team. So what do you see that happens with your people if you bring in something new? And I'm thinking that you run so much on AI and automations anyway, that maybe you don't often bring in something new. But so in that case, what would you recommend to companies that are bringing in some AI? Because I think most of them, and it's something I mentioned at VR Nation, I think most companies bring in AI because the leaders get excited about it and they implement it and adopt it without sharing it and letting people know what this is. Because what happens is that you end up with anxiety, you end up with people worried about their jobs. Are they being
Mhm.
de-skilled? How do you recommend that they deal with this? Certainly taking into account that they are human and they
Yeah.
are facing something that's a little bit unknown at the moment.
Uh-huh. So I think you touched the important point that if management is the one bringing it in and it's forced on you, then I feel like there is the overwhelm, but the pattern honestly is anxiety first and then relief. I still think that it's the management's responsibility to ideally you discussed beforehand, but whether you did or didn't, there's so much room for education to not drop in AI without explanation, not make them redundant suddenly. And so the idea is that they slowly see that they can be 10x more efficient. And now we're not talking about AI within, say, AutoHost, the screening, but just like even internally as a team, we have our internal AutoHost chat that plugs into all the models and all the things out there. And we have all these, we call them agents, but we train them on every department. And you start looking at them as real assistants. And you're now able to kind of 10x your, it's not even output, it's quality and efficiency of work. And I think that when people see that you're like the repetitive, the soul crushing tasks are the ones that disappear. And for things that you get to really use your, like the top of your expertise. Because at the end of the day, all of us have 20 tasks to do and capacity to do 10.
Mhm.
And what you want to be doing is choose the 10 that require Ella and somehow delegate the bottom 10. And not everybody has somebody to delegate to. And I think that once you realize that AI can A, do that's level one, and B, the top 10, AI can also be like a coach, an advisor, an assistant, a strategist. So it's not just like an assistant to delegate, but rather you can increase like the level of your work and kind of focus on bigger and better things when it comes to hospitality, how amazing it is to free up your time so that you build relationships, which AI can do the same way. The judgment calls you need to make, and just so much that gets freed up. I think that's the point, just showing the team where the value is so that they feel the relief.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, yes, you can now grow operations and do much more with people that feel more valuable in their role. And they can take on much more and they can focus on the decision making rather than the execution all the time.
If you're running a vacation rental, even just one property, you probably know this feeling. Your booking calendar lives in one place, guest messages are coming in somewhere else, you've got a pricing tool over here, and the cleaning schedule is in a spreadsheet you definitely haven't updated for a while. It's a lot to keep on top of. And the bigger you grow, the more unwieldy it becomes. Logify pulls all of that into one place. A full channel manager, your own direct booking website with a built-in booking engine, automated guest messaging, and a unified inbox for all your properties. There's less switching between apps, fewer things falling through the cracks, and more time to actually enjoy the business that you've built. And they also offer free onboarding, so you're not left to navigate it all alone. We've got a special deal for Vacation Rental Success listeners. You get 20% off yearly and bi-yearly plans with the code VRS20. Just click in the show notes to get started. In my VR Nation talk, I mentioned Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara. I'm sure you're familiar with the book. And there was one thing that jumped out to me from that book was the family meal, where they get the team together before a shift and they sit down and have a meal. But it's not just sitting and eating and testing out the food that's perhaps going to be served that night. It's also having a discussion. And his discussion, he engineered it so that he would have his people bring in examples of fabulous customer service experiences that they'd had. And they would share those experiences, and then they would discuss how they could use those experiences and put them into practice at 11 Madison Park, which was the restaurant. And I was talking at VR Nation saying that this is what you need to do with your team frequently, even if it's just a stand-up discussion once a week, and ask them, what are you using? What AI are you using? What are you using at home? What's just blown you away this week? Because AI blows us away every single week, if not day, if not hour. There's always something. But to get them together and say, okay, let's share this. Let's bring it out into the open. So that was my suggestion on communicating. If you're going to take AI into your company, then you need to communicate it back out to your team. But they're also out there experimenting with it as well.
Yeah, and I love that, because if anything, they'd be proud to bring it in, and it's something that's within comfort zone. And the most important part is you feel you're part of the decision. So that is huge.
Yeah, exactly. So we've been talking self-care, and that's fantastic. I love that. I think self-indulgent. Occasionally I have a self-indulgent day because it's not really self-care. Copious amounts of Cadbury's chocolate is not self-care. Yes, it's self-indulgent. But let's get back to this business of risk. You've written, and I've seen some of the things that you've written about third-party risk, and we had a little chat about that before we started recording this. And something else I mentioned in my talk at VR Nation was about auditing what's inside your tech stack, understanding what is actually going through your company, what people are using. Guesty put out, I don't know if you've seen the Guesty report that was published last week.
I think I followed it. I still haven't reviewed all of it.
Yeah, there was a couple of really interesting statistics in there. One of them is that although 81% of people surveyed, and they surveyed 534 operators, and 81% said they used AI, which is not surprising.
In one capacity or another, yeah.
Not surprising. But then but 43% of them said they used it, but they just used it casually daily. And then what was most surprising to me was that only 25% of them said that they were adopting AI into their business systems. And then another low percentage, I think it was 26 or 29 maybe, 29%, said they actually were using the AI features in their vendor tools. So it's a really small amount. So what are a couple of questions that operators should be asking when they're taking on a new vendor? And now we don't want to see, hey, we've got AI in our platform, because everybody should have now. It's a bit like back in the late 1990s saying, hey, we've got web.
That's true. And people are looking for it, but you're right.
So if somebody's considering taking on a new platform, what should they be looking at? What should they be asking about the tools, considering that a lot of people aren't actually using what's given to them?
So first of all, from the stats you share, I'm assuming the onus is more on the tech vendors to remove that barrier and remove the fear and the hesitation, be it through better training. I'm sure the success teams are working on that, and internal webinars and tutorials. So there's something about not just saying that you have it for the checkbox, but actually proving the value. Just like we said to deal with your employees. Yeah, first you have anxiety, then relief. It could be the same thing with your clients, right? Like you see an AI portion of it, but you might even feel kind of like you're not utilizing it to the fullest because you're not using it. So I think there's room to introduce that relief. When it comes to choosing vendors, I would probably still focus. AI is great, and you should look at what functionality it offers. But just because I'm so deep in the safety space and the how can things be abused. So now and you have vibe coding brought into this, and you have people just hacking out systems and connecting with their APIs and doing everything. So you're coming to a point where your vulnerability as an operator, and again, my focus is always your guest, be it problematic guest or the guest data that you're collecting, but your vulnerability is now dependent. There's a chain effect, and you're now also dependent on the tools you use and the tools they use and so on. So in that case, and especially when we talk to product teams, and when you talk to a product person that really appreciates that, oh my God, this is well built. Great. We can embed with your SDK. Your documentation is amazing. We can tell that this was built by somebody like from an engineering background, because there's something about understanding when we're talking about PII, which is personal identifiable information, the very basics are encryption. And if your PMS offers, in our case that I'm more familiar with, identity verification, you still want to know who they're using, how they're doing it, and make sure that your guest data is encrypted and is safe and everything is compliant. You should definitely talk about how it's stored, what your rights are, and who it belongs to. And then another really important thing that came up recently was some breaches. Breaches have been around all the time, but AI is now making breaches like even scarier, harder to detect. I think that the awareness around the need for transparency and SLAs is a lot higher
Sorry,
now.
you said
So
transparency and...
SLA, so service level
Okay.
agreements, kind of a vendor could come and say, if something happens, which we can't completely control, you can do the best in your ability, but there's also a matter of how you then communicate issues, how you jump to resolve them. And like ownership is something that a vendor really should be taking. And I think that a lot of operators, because they feel like their hands are tied, because they're using a whole layer on top of layer on top of layer of tech, and they're almost like dependent on all of these, there's merit to making sure that your central system at least is validating that everything is secure, be it SOC compliance, or again, it is really important when it comes to your data or your guest data. You don't suddenly want a breach and all of your guests being messaged and stuff. So there's a safety kind of like a responsibility decision to make and understand how much you're going to depend on them if something goes wrong. Can you switch out to a different tool? All of those are just smart considerations. You don't have to be technical to ask that, but you can do your due diligence in choosing which tools to work with to know that you can pick and choose and replace if you really needed to.
I sometimes think back to starting our business in 2003 and how much simpler it was with spreadsheets and fax machines and checks coming through the mail. That's where we started. And I hark back. Mind you, I was watching my husband yesterday trying to figure out a problem with our TV screen. He's got 3 remote controls and he's pressing each one of them. And I'm thinking, I have no clue. I cannot turn my television on anymore. And that just harkened me back to the days I said, when I just got up from my chair, I went over to the television and I went channel 1 or channel 2. It was just so much
But
simpler.
now, I'm assuming he should have just asked Google or Alexa instead of pressing buttons.
Oh, yes, he won't do that. And we've got both of them sitting in our living room. You can ask Google and you can ask Alexa. But yes, he's old school with new machinery.
Fair enough. But sometimes we can't afford to be. So
Yes.
I hear you dream about good old days, but
Yeah.
you can't fall behind.
I know. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing and loving every minute of it. And now I want to go back to a conversation that we were having before we started recording here. We were talking about AI safety and what a massive topic it is. And I'd done a podcast episode about it a couple of weeks ago, and a couple of people had come to me and said, I had never thought about these things. And I think I was mentioning things like bias, that if you're using AI to a chatbot to answer guest inquiries or make decisions on what to escalate, and if they're looking at phrases like rebate and refund and dirty and frustrated, they're going to escalate that more than if you get a guest that says, I'm so sorry to bother you, but there's a funny smell in the basement. I'm just wondering what it is. And if an AI is set up to respond to those triggers and not to the very polite, there's a smell in my basement, which turns out to be gas, then that is one level of AI safety you don't want to get into. But you were talking about something that you're going to discuss at your presentation at Scale AI in Brighton in June. So do you want to just share a bit of that with us?
Yeah, and the talk actually is about coining like bad AI in hospitality, and I talk about some of the abuses. But just before I do that, I think the main difference is we can't underestimate AI. It should be built properly, but AI and a chatbot are two very different
Mhm.
things. And so, if anything, those keywords and triggers that used to be programmed in, those should no longer really be the case. So you're right, the chatbots are harder to trust, but I feel like right now, all many of the platforms that are integrated AI will have the responses are instant. So at the end of the day, even if the key urgent words weren't there,
Mhm.
not like it will see a polite message and then respond later. It will still respond instantly. And I feel like enough of a smart analysis of the message will still get us there. So in that sense, I wouldn't be concerned with AI not catching something serious, but at the end of the day, like this really doesn't replace human judgment. And there should always be the right benchmarks and in your flow. Where do you escalate? Where do you bring in a human? Where do you flag something?
Yeah, that was more, it was about where human judgment comes in, because you can't automate everything. And something like that, there's a weird smell in the basement, that's or should be
Yeah.
automatically escalated to a human.
Yeah. No, that's true. And I'm assuming you would ask a follow-up question, but it's an interesting thing to check. Actually, I know so there's a big advocate for using that for guest support. Sab Mulligan. She runs, she's the head of operations and brand at Zing. They're a Malta company. She's a good friend of mine. So she speaks a lot about Zoe. They named their agent Zoe, about how she answers inquiries and so on. And but she really does talk about the fact that all of it is still in the setup. So much is still in their hands
Hmm.
that they just translate the hospitality, the care, the types of questions the team would have asked. And it was actually, from what I remember, based on their top agent.
Yeah.
So she took working patterns and empathy and like the way that person would speak. And that's when they try to bring it to the system. So similarly, I'm hoping that things get escalated. That's on the safety side that AI should really flag things. On the side of abusing AI, just because I come from that space of guest screening and verification, and we're focused on, let's say the operator is doing everything great, but you're being exploited, then I touch a little bit on the fact that AI, despite everything incredible that it's doing, that I'm all behind, we also need to be aware of the fact that right now, fabricating an identity is a lot easier than it
Hmm.
was X years ago. And that not only is it easier, it's cheaper, it's quicker, and it's harder to detect. So it's kind of like the perfect storm where it doesn't even have to be criminals anymore. It's just bad actors, bad apples, people that have some malicious intentions. They can very easily do something and use a tool for $10 to $20 and fabricate everything they need and slip through the cracks. And it's where I always preach the gut feeling is very dangerous, because on the one hand, you develop it a lot, but on the other hand, it's a loophole for any type of exploit or bias or discrimination. Now that you're talking AI, it's a whole new level. Your gut feeling won't sense it. Now your gut feeling goes, is this too perfect? It might be AI. And that's just like a cycle we're caught in. So a little bit of what I talk about is, again, we're now at the age of when AI is used maliciously, and we're talking voice cloning incidents, because the one thing I would do if there's any concern when I was a property manager is tell my team to pick up the phone.
Hmm.
Just call them. Just see that they're fine. Do they sound sketchy? Ask them some questions. Whereas now, if you have voice cloning that is even like able to talk in real time, go through a prompt and answer questions, you're not going to throw them off with a question. They're going to give you the most perfect answer every time. So that's not a strategy that works. And so we're talking, and then you have synthetic identities. This isn't John that stole Bob's ID. This is a completely made up person, but with ID that looks real and something that checks out. And all of these factors where human eyes can really no longer detect. And so that's where I bring that on in some of the writing that I do in the talks, just to understand that, again, your judgment call, your experience, your processes are the groundwork. But then there's a lot that AI does that we can no longer detect. And it's about using tools that utilize AI to make sure that you flag those types of inconsistencies.
So what you're saying is that the AI is better at flagging those inconsistencies than human judgment now.
Oh, 100%. You have inconsistencies. You can look at an ID. We will scan the barcode or the something and see whether numbers actually match. You have things like looking at a photo. I don't need to convince you that you can look at a photo and you'll have no idea whether it's a person or AI generated.
Yeah,
Uh,
I remember I was prepping for the Verma conference, and I did a session with Bart Sobeys just on just beginner AI. And we
Mhm.
had a bit of a fun thing. We posted up 2 images. One's the real one, one's the AI generated ones, and asked for, and people were saying, oh yeah, the waves look a bit off in that water. And oh, that person's got an extra finger. Doesn't happen anymore.
But I feel like we went through the stage of knowing that you can't trust anything you read online,
Hmm.
right? You research, you go the extra step. When we drilled it in, it's gonna take some adjustment to go. It's harder to say you can't trust your eyes. But if you can't trust your eyes solely, there's still things you can do, right? There's likelihood and probability. And like we're not at the end of the day, the type of risk that we're dealing with, we just want to make sure that we have enough of those factors to make it very
Hmm.
inconvenient and expensive to go through all of your layers. But yes, there are some things that AI will absolutely recognize that a human won't. Some of it is even not things that are visible. So as they type up the form, you just see the completed form. But the system processing it knows, let's say, even credit card stuffing. And credit card stuffing is when lots of credit cards get compromised and stolen, and then you end up having 17 that get declined and the 18th one goes through. But the system behind it would even see whether those were manually typed in or and you had a bot doing it. You'll have the way of filling out an online form that you'll be able to recognize whether that was a human behavior or not. So there's a lot of things that just like we physically can't spot.
This is fascinating. Really fascinating. And I'd love to go and talk about it more, but I want to find out more now about AutoHost and what you can actually do for the property managers and perhaps the independent hosts that are listening at the moment. How does this all translate into something that they can use?
So it's a great question because we've gone through like a few almost like iterations and expansions of AutoHost where we work only with some type of operators. And then we've recently transitioned. So we work a lot with, we have an SDK solution, which is like the next level past API for those that don't know. And kind of like it's a way for software to embed your tech into your platform. So the latest partnership we just announced was Breezeway. So again, you no longer need an AutoHost account. You just have that widget
Hmm.
inside of Breezeway. We'll work with a lot of operators, guest apps, PMSs. So first of all, guest screening verification is something that in the near future, every PMS should be offering. We are at the back end of many of them. There's other tools out there as well. But at the end of the day, if one thing that even a small operator needs to understand is that you're not necessarily safer. You don't have to be an enterprise to be targeted. If
Hmm.
anything, the less safeguards you have, the easier target you are. So I would definitely say, especially now, ID verification is table stakes. If 5 years ago it said you really should, and that would be the responsible thing to do, now it's like you don't take IDs, but how do you know who walks through the door? Do that as a complete baseline starting point. And then we're always taking feedback, even though we're available and we really preach for, we want to be just very industry agnostic and make sure that it's available to everyone. We listen to feedback. So we've had a lot of smaller operators go, I want to use it this way. I want to use it that way. More to come. And we're continuing to work in, but the idea is really just to make it available and accessible to everybody. So right now, behind closed doors, the focus is both anybody starting to hack things out in vibe coding and just wants access to the platform. We want to make sure that they can access our data and information to test. And then anybody that's smaller but wants to utilize it, the big vision really is that it should be available for everyone. And we just all together maintain the beautiful part of the industry. And fraud gets more sophisticated, but we are also.
So, what surprised you recently about the whole world of AI? Has anything that's come along and just really floored you, where you thought, I didn't see that coming?
My God, so many things. I think it's more the philosophizing about the future. So if the individual increments 100%, like every single day, the more things that I do, I started playing with Cloud Code just like a month or two ago. So there's my daily tasks, but then I have a quick like lunch picker app for my kids. Here are your options. The night before, you pick your lunch. And my morning is easier. So little things that I think the main thing I understood is that I'm less focused on what AI tool can we build and start the next startup idea, but rather use it to make your life
Yeah.
efficient. So focus on how can you improve your life, your productivity, your free up time for self-care, if anything. And then I dwell into the bigger picture. What do I teach my kids? Do I let them ask it questions? Do I let them consult about stuff? Do I so how do I have the conversation of what do you want to be when you grow up other than happy? Professionally going to be different. And so if anything, I'm really focused on, I don't know what's going to happen in a month, let alone 5, 10 years. So I'm just like, learn to learn
Hmm.
and develop social skills.
Wonderful.
We,
Wonderful. It's going to be wonderful meeting you in June in Brighton.
yes, I look forward to
That
it.
will be great. Going to sit in on your session for sure. Actually, it's a day of AI. It's like a geek day.
Yeah.
So I'm going to
It's gonna
sit
be
in on every session.
all the conferences talk about it anyway. It makes sense that they made a conference. Just let's not beat around the bush. It's going to be a conference fully about AI, but let's tackle it. So I have a lot of respect. I think Damia team are doing an amazing job.
Oh, they're doing a fantastic job. I am trying to bring them to Canada. I have every so often, I have this discussion with Damien and we say, scale Canada, Damien, what do you think? So
It should be an extra signature.
yeah, we are having another discussion in Brighton. So you'll have to come in on that.
I will be there.
Okay, Ella, it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you. Really
Thank you
appreciated
so
your time. Look forward to meeting you in person. What a great conversation. I love talking to Ella. She has such determination and motivation to succeed. And I think what struck me most was how clearly she had thought about what AI does to the people inside a business, not just about the processes, which is what most people are really focused on. And the point she made about anxiety coming before relief really landed for me, because most teams feel the anxiety first when something new gets introduced. And if you bring in a tool without bringing your people along with it, you'll lose the chance to get to the relief. The family meal idea from Unreasonable Hospitality is exactly the kind of practice that bridges that gap. And it gives your team the space to share what they're using, what's working, and what concerns them. And then on the guest and safety side, her reminder that you don't have to be a larger operation to be a target is one worth sitting with. ID verification isn't just a feature for big property management companies anymore. It's table stakes. So before I go, I just want to share that I've got involved with Steve Schwab to create a new community for people that are interested in AI. If you've been around for a while, you know that Mike and I set up a community a while back called Straight Chat. We weren't getting the engagement, and it was likely because it was the platform that we were on. So Steve has put together a network on Circle, and you will find a link to that in the show notes as well. That is getting very active now. It's completely free. You can go and join that if you're a complete beginner to AI. Or if you've been around quite a while and you're geeking out like I am, there's a place there for you too. So go join me and Steve in the STR AI network. I'll be doing weekly tutorials, mostly on Claude to start with, but whatever people are looking for, we are going to try and provide it. So I hope I get to see you in there. Until next time, take care, enjoy the listen, and enjoy your day. It's been a pleasure as ever being with you. If there's anything you'd like to comment on, then join the conversation on the show notes for the episode at vacationrentalformula.com. We'd love to hear from you, and I look forward to being with you again next week.